We've really been enjoying discussing some things with Dr. Dallas Willard, and he has quite a sense of humor, as you'll probably understand during his presentation. First learned about Dr. Willard when he did an article for a publication we have that's called The Real Issue. And this was produced last year, and it goes out 4 times a school year. And USC philosophy professor's winning combination: professional excellence and spiritual commitment. And that's what we're talking about today. And he said, my primary task is to be a light in the university, to do the best possible job for the glory of God. And as you look at your name tag, if it hasn't fallen off yet, it says University of California, Irvine. And then it says, let there be light. And I thought that was appropriate, that the university has chosen that theme, that we want to be a light to other people. We want to influence other people. And our speaker this afternoon is a man of great influence and also great humility. Dr. Willard is from Missouri, the Show Me State, and is actually born in is it Buffalo, Missouri?
Buffalo, Missouri.
Buffalo, Missouri. And if you've ever been to Buffalo, would you please raise your hand? I think we'll have one person that's here.
I left very soon.
And did his undergraduate education at William Jewell College in Tennessee, Temple College, and Baylor University. Graduate education at Baylor University and the University of Wisconsin, where he received his Ph.D. and majored in philosophy and minored in history of science in 1964. Since 1965, he's been a professor of philosophy at USC, the school up the road. And he has been the director of the School of Philosophy from 1982 to 1985. I had a chance to meet one of the PhD candidates there, Doug Guidett, and I was talking to him. I said, tell me about Dallas Willard. And he said he's the most mature person I've ever met. And I don't think he was talking about his age.
I'll have to ask him about that.
The reason I said Dr. Willard is a humble person, he has a book that's called The Spirit of the Disciplines. And I've been reading this book for 2 months now. I'm almost a third of the way through. And it's really super reading. It's kind of, you read a paragraph and you think, let me think about that for a couple weeks. And then you go back and you read another paragraph. So I'm almost a third of the way through. And I asked him to bring some books down. He said no, he doesn't bring books down. So he's not here to sell a book. He's here to influence us for Jesus Christ, and that's the reason we're here. So let's welcome now Dr. Dallas Willard.
Thank you very much. You know, one of the things you have to do first when you're introduced as being very humble is you have to get up and say, no, I'm not humble. And so that takes care of that. And you'll have to decide. I'll leave that in the hands of people who are interested in such things. I really do just come to you today, not as a spiritual or intellectual giant, but just as a colleague. That's much easier. And to talk about some things which I think you may find of significance for your life as people who are busy around the academic world, as I do for mine. Now, when Frank first spoke to me about coming, he suggested the topic, dealing with ideas that are destructive of a responsible self. Dealing with ideas that are destructive of a responsible self. I like that topic very much, but the problem is there are just too many ideas to be dealt with on that heading. And perhaps just mention a few of them before coming to the one that we are going to deal with. Perhaps there's no idea more destructive of a responsible self today than the idea that the moral life consists basically in claiming your rights and allowing other people to enjoy theirs. there has been an increasing tendency to think of morality strictly in terms of rights. And my own view is that that strikes to the heart of any possible practical morality, because I think of morality as primarily consisting of claims that one makes against oneself, not of claims that one makes against others. It's easy to imagine someone today urging you to stand up for your rights. But if you were to develop a bumper sticker that said, "Stand up for your responsibilities," people would think it was a joke. And if you were to carry a placard to that effect, people would just consider you as a kook. And that is a simple way of indicating where we have come into very deep and difficult problems in thinking about self-fulfillment in the moral life, being a responsible self. There are just a lot of other ideas that could be discussed, and really I must apologize to those of you who may have a deeper interest in moral theory today, because I will not be able to, in the context, go very deeply into a lot of important matters that you have to deal with here on the campus. For example, the whole idea of moral relativity tends to be assumed to follow automatically from cultural relativity. A few people go out to different tribes and bring back word that things are done very differently there, which is certainly true. They bring back word that things that we regard as wrong are regarded as right in other societies, and things that we regard as right are regarded as wrong. And immediately the conclusion is drawn that, well, what is right here is wrong there, and what is wrong here is right there, which is a howling non sequitur, but I don't have time to analyze it, but it's become one of those fashionable ideas that's very difficult to put in the framework of a responsible self. Well, there are many other such ideas. I want to move as quickly as possible to the one which I want to focus on today, but just to observe that we live in a time when there is great fascination with moral reality of some sort. Whether we're talking about Milli Vanilli or Dr. Martin Luther King or Mr. Cranston or whoever it may be, there's a constant emphasis usually upon wrongdoing. You occasionally get some focus on right doing, but normally the focus is on wrongdoing. And indeed, that itself turns out to be one of the problems with developing a responsible self in the modern world. Because if you place the emphasis upon the action rather than upon the character, you have essentially moved to a level where you cannot in any way really control the springs of moral existence. You have moved to the level of what in the New Testament is called the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees. What in the movies is called doing the right thing. What sometimes in teaching ethics we simply call formalism. The idea that you can define the moral right in terms of specific kinds of actions. When Mr. Cranston stands up before the committee and says to them with all of the pathos his heart can gather that he has done nothing legally or ethically wrong, you have to think about what he means by ethically. And if he means, I haven't done anything that is considered wrong in terms of the rules set down by the Ethics Committee of the Senate, that's one thing. But that leaves a lot of room to be a very bad person. And that's always characteristic of this kind of thinking about ethics. It doesn't go to the heart of the matter. And if you can take Jesus seriously as a teacher and a moral theorist, You see him standing alongside of people like Aristotle and like Kant and saying that the real issues have to do with character or personality. And the idea that we are, when we're talking about morals and moral theory, we're basically talking about the goodness and badness of character is one that we have a hard time assimilating today, partly due to some of the things we were talking about with Don here before we got going about everything from deconstruction to cognitive sciences, science and recognition of things by computers and so forth. There's a great confusion at present about the nature of the self. Now, moral theory, I believe, is not moral phenomena. That's not something that you can package in a nice, neat little case. And moral theory is a very difficult field to be convincing and exhaustive and accurate in. But I want to just share in terms of today's meeting the simple conviction that I have, that the center of moral reality is the goodness or badness of character or person. So when we come to talk about the moral significance of truck driving, or the moral significance of being an accountant, or the moral significance of the academic life, what we're really talking about is character. We're talking about the character of people who are involved in truck driving, the academic life, or whatever kind of life it may be. And I have to emphasize the difficulty that that puts upon us. There is really so much confusion and disagreement about what the human self is, and hence about the very nature of character and personality, that you would expect it to be hard to deal with these issues, and perhaps that in itself is a reason why we have come to back away from it. And yet the central issue for every person, and I would be willing to argue it is an issue of biological and psychological as well as ethical dimensions, is, am I a good person or am I a bad person? And when we have gotten past all of our efforts to defend ourselves to others and to convince others that we're okay, I'm okay, you're okay, probably the truth is we both stink. But you see, the reason why that little saying gained such prominence was it's really important to be able to think that you're okay, isn't it? Right. And in fact, it's probably directly related to things like your blood pressure and the way your digestive tract functions. So this is a fundamental issue which we have an increasingly difficult time to deal with, partly because of the disputed nature of the self. Elizabeth Anscombe, who is certainly one of the most highly regarded of late 20th century moral philosophers in England and America, flatly states, and I quote, that it is not profitable for us at present to do moral philosophy. And it should be laid aside at any rate until we have an adequate philosophy of psychology. That is, until at MIT they figure out what the mind is and so forth. Or at Irvine. And she says that we should simply lay it aside until we have an adequate philosophy of psychology in which we are now conspicuously lacking. Well, the problem is you can't lay it aside. See, you have to decide, don't you? This isn't a dress rehearsal. I often tell my own students when we're teaching applied ethics that life isn't like a blackboard where you come in and fill it up every day and then somebody erases it and you get to start over again the next day. See, this isn't a dress rehearsal. This is our life. So now I have nodded and tipped my hat at all the difficulties in the one area, and now I turn to say we still have to decide what we're going to do about it. And indeed, we cannot leave this issue alone. It is both a public issue, constantly agitated in public, as well as a personal issue, which drives us to some sort of settlement. And I want now then to turn to this issue and just make a few points, and we're going to have time, I trust, for some discussion, and make just a few points about the academic life in particular. What do I mean when I ask about the moral significance of the academic life? I really am raising the question of how you become a good person in the process of living a life in the academy. Now, we could say, we could raise the moral significance of truck driving, the moral significance of you fill in the blank. And see, another one of the problems that affects us today is, another one of those general ideas about responsible selves, is the idea that vocation does not have anything inherently to do with your moral quality. Indeed, the word vocation is old-fashioned and out of touch. Now it's a job. So we might better say, what does my job have to do with my becoming a morally good person? That's a clear question, isn't it? And I think perhaps we can all seize onto that. And the answer to that generally is nothing whatsoever. Nothing whatsoever. I mean, when you go to your job, you ought to tell the truth. It's not too costly. A little girl recently, I heard, defined a lie as an abomination to God and an ever-present help in time of trouble. And it sure is helpful, isn't it, So, I mean, one might say, well, you oughtn't to lie, you ought to be dishonest, you ought to respect the rights of others and be sensitive and so forth and caring. But you could do that. It doesn't matter whether you're a truck driver or an accountant or a secretary or sweeping the streets or teaching cognitive science at Irvine. You can still do that, see. It's a general idea. Now, that it wasn't, if you look into professional ethics and the development of professional ethics, when you run into the older codes that affect everything from accounting, which is one of the older professions, by the way, to medicine and so on, you will see that there is an assumption about moral quality in the person who is a professional. The idea that being a good person had something to do with being a good doctor. Now, I often try that out in hospitals where I speak to ethics groups, and it's amusing to watch the reaction. Usually the reaction will be something like, well, I would rather have a technically good person operating with me than one who never told a lie. Or, if you're going in for brain surgery, do you want an honest person or a very competent scoundrel? And you're supposed to say, I'll take the very competent scoundrel anytime. Probably I would. I would certainly rather have a competent scoundrel than a truck driver operating on my brain. But that isn't the only issue, you see. And when you work it around, you say, well, now, wait a moment. We're not just talking about operating. We're talking about living together with someone in a professional context for 25 years. That begins to change things a little bit. Still, you have a lot of folks who quite readily handle that by simply treating their professional existence as one thing and their personal life as another, and never the twain shall meet. So that's a really troubling idea. I want to stand against that, and I want to say something very simple. I will not be able to develop it as adequate as it should be, probably because I couldn't do it if I had 2 weeks, but in any case, we don't have enough time. But I want to say very simply that I believe that if we want to have a responsible self, one of the most important things we have to do is to integrate our work into our moral life. I put it very simply. I regard my work as an academic, as an intellectual, as my way of being a good person. Now, I recognize that if I say that, immediately I have colleagues that are going to want to run out the door. And I sympathize with motives like that. I sympathize with the misunderstandings, as I would call them. Because they are immediately thinking in terms of me trying to substitute my moral strivings or even my religion in place of good work. Right? So that perhaps I want to be a well-meaning drudge of some sort in whom the light of intellect has totally gone out between my ears. So I understand there are a lot of problems with this, okay? I understand that. I can't deal with them all. Perhaps I can't deal with them all successfully, but I want to now just make briefly a few statements about this, and then we'll have some time for discussion. When I look at academic life, I see, first of all, it is basically good work. There are intrinsic values involved. For example, study or inquiry as an activity or human function is an inherently good thing. Secondly, knowledge or truth. And you almost have to pause and give apologies for using the word truth now, but I'm not going to do that. These are inherently good things. For example, if we get into some of the more recondite areas of thought and culture, we certainly find things that are very difficult to ascertain the truth about, but still it's a good thing if we can, and in many areas of life we can obtain the truth, and truth is something that is inherently good, and achieving it is inherently good. And instrumentally also, of course, the academic life is a field where we help others. We help others to know. We help others to understand, inquiry and learning. Perhaps even we help them know some truths, though again, in our present context, people are rather uneasy about that. Secondly, in the instrumental values, there is personal influence which we exercise on those around us, not just if we are teaching, but the whole university context and the context of intellectual life is one of great personal influence. You see, in our current society, most of the authoritative structure by which our society runs comes out, roughly, out of the university setting. It isn't the churches anymore that are looked at by society as a source of authority. It is the universities, the learning centers, the printing presses, and so on. And this is a rather remarkable and very important change, and I don't think we deal with it well. By we, I mean everyone involved on both sides. For example, many people among my colleagues who have, for years, have always disowned personal influence over their students. And they fundamentally misread the nature of human relationships in order to do that. Because what the students do when they're around people in positions of authority who are older is they learn from them. They may flunk the course, but they will learn from the professor. And it may not be momentous, but it will be significant. And then finally, the final instrumental good which I would list in the academic life is indeed leadership in the community. There is a responsibility that falls on us because of the de facto role of the university and the intellectual life that we either will wield for good or for evil. We cannot allow it to drift because drifting is itself of great moral significance. Now, then as an academic, I look at my work and I look at my thinking and my research and my students, and I say, this is a major part of my life. How can I set this aside? How could I say this is of no significance for me and my moral fulfillment as an individual? I can't do that. When I think about papers I write, meetings I go to, students I have, relations with colleagues, I have to think about it in the context. This is the place where I become what I am going to forever be. That's it. So I can't say, well, I'm going to work, so whoopee, this has no moral significance for the next 8 hours or 14 hours or whatever it may be. It's an essentially false view of the self and of life to regard it in that way. So what I mean when I speak of a morally fulfilled person now, I'll very briefly say, it means to be a person in whom the basic moral ideals of humanity are substantially realized. I'll talk about those more in just a minute. I have to immediately wave my hand at relativism because people will say, what do you mean, referring to the basic moral ideals of humanity? I don't put this forward as something that can be handled in a cavalier fashion, but I must use it because I think if you in fact will compare humanity very widely you will see that there are shared moral ideals. They specify themselves somewhat differently, but I would challenge anyone to find a society in which a distinction between good and bad persons is not drawn. It will be cluttered with many things, culture, religion, misunderstandings of factual matters, and so on, but it will be drawn. And usually the more primitive the society, the more rigorously it is drawn. And one of the things that has misled so many people who have looked at primitive societies about this is the bad people aren't there. They're dead. Right? Now, I don't mean to say that that's always correctly done. I don't mean to suggest that. The point is that in primitive societies, people are simply excluded. And we have a real issue in our society today as to how to handle that, of course, and it's appropriate that it should be a great issue because it's very difficult and hard to settle. But it can be misleading when we look at many of the more primitive societies where it looks as if everyone just loved everyone and no, there was never any problem, never any disagreement. No one ever looked at another and said, "You're horrible," right? Because of the way those things work. So to be a morally fulfilled person, I believe, is to possess those traits which mark persons as admirable, not enviable, which make us want to be like other persons in such a way that we feel we have failed to be who we should be if we are not like them. I have to stress once more, just briefly, that I'm talking about basically the inner character. I'll give you a statement of Aristotle's just to hang this on. He says, the just person is not the one who does the just act. The just person is the one who does it the way a just person would do it. And he meant basically out of a settled habit to choose the right proportion of action and feeling in relationship to the context, what he called the mean. Kant also, all of the moralists have understood, I believe, that you cannot begin to fathom the depths of moral reality if you just deal with acts. You are dealing here with character. And character is a matter of what you would do. See, there are many people who have never stolen anything, but they have the soul of a thief. Whether you're a thief, that's a matter of what you would do if the circumstances were right, not what you have or haven't done. Virtue and innocence are different things. And these are matters which perhaps you want to talk about later, but I won't find it now to just come to the specifics of these traits I've mentioned and briefly what they mean in the context of the academic life. The academic life is, for the person who chooses it, a place where they will mature as truthful as opposed to deceitful, honest as opposed to dishonest. I'll drop the opposed tos here and just go on if you get the point. Compassionate and sensitive toward others, devoted to the enhancement of good, possibly at a level of self-sacrifice. Respectful of others, which is not quite the same thing as compassionate. Generous. Committed to being a good person. My own reading of these matters is that one of the essential things about a morally fulfilled person is they are committed to being a good person. They're not just committed to doing the right thing. They are committed to that, but they realize that in order to be committed to doing the right thing, you have to be committed to being the kind of person who does the right thing. And if you don't, your commitment to doing the right thing is never genuine. You have to be committed to transforming the inside of the self to be the sort of person who can be sensitive, who can be compassionate, who can be non-arrogant, non-manipulative, who can be truthful. And that commitment, I think, is an essential part of what goes into leading the academic life. I mean, we have all sorts of issues about fraud. Sorry, a Freudian slip, no doubt. And recently, our president, Jim Zumberg, who tends to say things I think sometimes that he can't quite mean, but he said he just couldn't understand what would make a person falsify data. I can understand it. Can't you? I know just what makes people do it. I know what that is. If you're not going to commit those kinds of things, you have to be committed to being the kind of person who wouldn't do it. And that's a matter of transforming the self. And Plato and Aristotle and Augustine and Aquinas and moralists generally, Kant, have had a lot to say about that kind of thing. So, let me just conclude here by saying that we have to attend, if we're going to be morally realized in the academic world, and there's so many complexities here to be discussed, we have to attend to both the ideational and the practical background by which we're able to do it. One of the things we have to recognize is the academic world is just more of the world. It really isn't, in one sense, a special place. Morally, it's very much an unspecial place. The same kinds of problems that prevent people from realizing themselves morally in an academic world are basically the same kind that prevent the truck drivers and the accountants and the generals in the army and the politicians. Basically the same sort of thing. And we have to understand that. In order for moral realization to be possible, we have to deal with issues like, well, you know, the beer commercial. You only go around once, right? Boy, that's a powerful idea. You only go, what does it mean? It means you better grab it while you're going by, doesn't it? Isn't that what it means? So go for the fill in the blank. Gusto's great in America. Fun, money, power, and so on. So, I mean, we really have to think about it, and that's where questions, especially for those of us who are Christians, really need to think about what it means to be a follower of Christ. And whether or not we're thinking of him merely as someone who died a death for us, or whether we think of him as someone who lives with us now and whom we can follow, and who can perhaps, when we are hearing that voice that says, you only go around once, perhaps he will whisper something else in our ear. Because if we don't have the correct ideational background, we will be overwhelmed. And you see, walked in the other day, and a famous philosopher from another part of the world, one of my colleagues I was talking about, and he's effectively gone nuts. And what it was, he fell apart morally, if you wish, or however you want to put that. And you know, you just get so tired of hearing this. Who's next? Am I next? Well, I mean, after all, whether we are Christians or not, we live in this world. We have to deal with the real dynamics of the self. We have to ask ourselves, what are the ideas that live in my mind? What makes what I do count in life? And if it's not by being a Christian, there's got to be some answer to that question. Our life runs pretty well from the ideas between our ears. There are a lot of other things that are related to them. But how we think about things is very important. Of course, the practical side. The routine of self-examination, of reflection, of taking time. Burnout is epidemic in our society. Sleep deficiency, you know, they have studies of these things now. They find people doctors, surgeons falling asleep while they're operating. Whole cabins sleeping for 10 minutes. Don't tell me about this. Some things I don't want to hear about. But I mean, people are just worn out. If you're exhausted, it affects your moral behavior. It affects the quality of your life. So it's an ideational and practical issues that come up with reference to our fulfillment in the academic life. I just want to conclude then by emphasizing just two sentences on this point of our influence as teachers. We teach people how to live. We do it all the time. We teach our colleagues, we teach our students, we teach our family, we teach our neighbors. We're constantly teaching. David Glidden over at Riverside, who's I really enjoy his. He writes a good bit for the Los Angeles Times. You probably have read some of his articles and enjoy reading them. He had one some time back, though, that I disagreed with because he was making a point which should be made. You can't teach morals in the modern world, especially in the university, by preaching at people. And he was hammering away at that and how we being professors, basically, are in a position of authority and we must not use that. And that's right. But you see, that's no good unless you recognize that even in behaving in precisely that way of restraining yourself, you are teaching your students. You are giving them moral concepts. You're telling them what the moral life is about. You're probably communicating them to another one of these grand ideas, that when it comes to a moral matter, well, you have to decide for yourself. Now, you see, there's a sense in which that's absolutely true. And there's a sense in which it's absolutely false. But if you approach this in the hands-off way that we tend to do, you fail to recognize that we're constantly teaching this by who we are and how we deal with everything that comes up in the classroom, how to get through life. And we have a great moral effect in that regard. So, tremendously complex subject. I hope I've said a few things that might be stimulating to your thinking some, and if we have a few minutes now, I'd like to just stop and perhaps take comments and questions. And it can be comments, it doesn't have to be questions. You may have something you just want to say on that. So we'll stop when you stop us. But any comments or questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm teaching an intro to philosophy or intro to psych class, and I'm a Christian. Picking up on your last point, what is legitimate for me to say and not to say about my Christian faith?
Anything that's relevant to the subject matter. And that may be nothing. No, that's exactly I think. Now, you are going to be who you are. See, there's a line in Unamuno somewhere where he says we should pay less attention to what people say to us and more to what they tell us without saying anything. Right. And I think that's very important to understand. Now, who you are will come out. And you know, when Jesus said in, the Gospel of John, he says, they that believe on me from their, he didn't say their mouth, he said from their belly will flow rivers of living water. I'm glad he didn't say the mouth. You know? And the truth of the matter is, what we are oozes from our pores. Now, where it's relevant, see, if I'm teaching Introduction to Philosophy, I have a lot of issues that I discuss that are related to that. I mean, great pieces of philosophy, like Hume's Essay on Miracles, for example, is a very thinly veiled reference to the resurrection of Christ. It's put in terms of the resurrection of Queen Elizabeth I. So there are tremendous issues there, tremendous issues that you can get into. Then, of course, you will have many opportunities to speak with students. I never bring up anything that is not relevant to the course or introduced by the student, unless they come to me and they say to me, I want to know about this. Then I tell them what I think. And, of course, after you've been around a place as long as I have, everyone knows you anyway. But I know that before that time there is some problem. Right. So I think you have to handle that very carefully, but you're welcome to introduce. Now, you as a Christian may see that some things are relevant to introduce that a non-Christian wouldn't. But the test of that will be the logic of the issue. You know. For example, I have a view that in discussing the question about the nature of evil and the famous argument from evil against the existence of God, it's really about the only one, that the issue of the afterlife is very important in discussing that issue. Now, I probably think that because I am a Christian, and I have a certain view of God and all of that. But that doesn't warrant me in introducing it. I have to argue that strictly by the logic. And I have to listen to the counter-replies in the same way. And I really think that Christians underestimate the power of good logic, just good logic. I don't think... there's an old English writer by the name of L.T. Hobhouse who has a phrase in one of his books back in the 19th century. I didn't read it then, but it was written then, and I read it later. but that helped me a lot. He said, all that philosophy requires of religion is a fair field and no quarter given. And my feeling is, I couldn't follow Jesus Christ if he believed anything else about it. I don't believe that Jesus is in the business of manipulating and dodging issues and covering things up. And I have to constantly deal with students who are Christians who come in, and they have essentially been taught by their experience in their churches that the Christians sort of ducked when the intellectual bullets started flying, and dodged, and that they really had something to be scared about. And all I got to say, if that's the game, I won't play. And I don't believe that Jesus Christ would play. Actually, it's a good exercise to take the New Testament and do a logical analysis of Jesus' arguments. He was a thrashing machine. He was very good with it. And so I think I really want to say logic is the field that determines this. Now, it won't overcome sin, it won't regenerate the lost and so forth, but it will certainly give them something to think about. Yeah.
You were mentioning various cultures. Do you find in your research a certain uniform moral code?
When I teach applied ethics, I will usually take text from Confucius, from Buddha, from ancient Greece, polytheistic religion, and of course Hebrew Christian context. What you can't say anything very neat about this, but if you will simply put them up and look at them, you will see a great commonality that has to do, on the one hand, with a kind of commitment to a transcendental realm, but on the other hand, to personal relationships of decency and order that is very, very comparable. I don't really feel obliged to find something in common with every group, but I think if you look at every group, you will find very few of them that don't, the basic issues about personal relationships that turn upon honesty, on truth-telling, respect for family, which, by the way, is one of the most common. It's not unrelated, of course, to the universality of the incest taboo. But that's just one aspect of it. If you look at the respect for family relationships, now you'll see it's overdone in some cases, because in some cases, fathers and so on are practically made gods, especially after they're dead. There's a deep psychological truth to that, I think. But still, no, I really think that if you take a book like Westermarck's Ethical Relativity, not to mention things like Ruth Benedict and Margaret Mead, and you look at the really wild claims they make about moral relativity, again, not cultural relativity, but moral relativity, you'll see that they really are just not warranted in those kinds of assertions.
I haven't read those, so they're asserting what?
Well, they assert... They will go in and they will describe, for example, sexual behavior as it relates, say, to pubescent young men and women in a South Sea island. And they will point out that this is rather different from behavior in Southern California or wherever you might like to refer to. And then they will immediately draw the conclusion that what is right and wrong in the one situation is different. It doesn't follow from the fact that people say things that are right in one society are not the same things as they say are right in the other society. And of course, there's a whole problem with identifying these actions also, which I'm not getting into. It doesn't follow that what people say, that's the way it is. I mean, certain societies believe the earth was flat, but the earth wasn't flat in those societies. Right? And now, of course, immediately the response is, yes, but moral whatever is different from physical reality. Well, then you invite people to say exactly how it is, and that's the way the discussion goes. But I think if you candidly look at cultures, you will see an immense amount of commonality at the practical level.
I recently went through a censorship ordeal in an educational
Oh boy.
organization where trying to quote from the Bible.
Yeah.
He was accused of proselyting in
Yeah.
a way. And yet New Age people, the mystical religions of the East, or so forth, are going throughout the educational establishment, carte blanche. And I was wondering what strategies, suggestions, experience you have for Christians in that marketplace countering appropriately.
I think the main thing for them to do is to do just what you did, carry on. If it's legitimate to introduce the Scripture in the context of the educational experience, fine. What you have to do with here is prejudice. Like we have, some of you may know that there is a revival of what is called the goddess. And this is tied to the ancient goddess Diana in the Greek and Roman world, and to Astaroth in the Syrian and Middle Eastern world. And we have a lot of people at USC and elsewhere who are writing books and actually worshiping the goddess. And this is treated as serious intellectual work. Now, fine. All you have to do is to point out that Christianity is at least as serious as that. The problem is, you see, we are living in a reaction. The universities in the Western world came out of Christianity. And there has been, for some good reasons, but by and large it has become really an uncontrolled, irrational reaction, a reaction against that background. Now, if we had come out of Baalism, probably we'd be able to quote the Bible and people would respond against Baal. They say, no, don't quote Baal. But that's a historical reality that we're trapped in. And we just have to recognize it and carry. I think it will pass. But, of course, a lot of people are going to be hurt while it's passing. On the other hand, the people on the other side will say, yes, a lot of people have been hurt because of the oppressiveness of the Christian viewpoint, and tie a string of other terms to it also, possibly. So I think all we have to say is, well, we're faithful. We'll go along. We have to recognize also that in the universities, it was very hard for me to recognize this, because when I came into the university system, my assumption was that everything ran by pure reason. And what I have had to come to accept, and I do it not in an embittered way, but in I hope, a sensitive and a loving and understanding way, recognizing that I too am made of flesh, is that basically our university system, our legal system, runs by authority. It does not run by reason. And authority moves in response to historical currents. So now, for the person who takes a kind of radical New Testament view of Christianity, I mean, this is just more of the same. And when they take us out, if I hear of some Christian being taken out in the middle of the Irvine campus, tied to a stake, tar poured on them, and fire set to them, I will say, well, looks like we're right where we've always been. See, the problem is, and it is a problem, and it isn't necessarily a good thing, that the Christian church has engaged and endured in such an advantage for a long period of time. Do we really need the advantage? Or do we just need to stand out there and do what we believe to be right?
That's beautiful. The authority thing, exactly what happened. There was no reason.
No, it isn't.
But the authority and the trend within the organization absolutely,
Yeah.
capitulate. They wouldn't let me quote the Bible.
No, I understand that, and I've seen that over and over, and if you had stood up to quote almost any other thing you could mention, it would have been quite acceptable. But you understand it works by authority, and this has a cultural...
I couldn't believe what I was hearing from top men.
Yeah. Well, but you have seen it. You have seen it. And of course, I have to be conscious of myself in all contexts. Am I just operating out of blind authority, or am I actually listening? Am I thinking? Am I being loving? Am I being intelligent? As an academic, one of my moral duties is to be intelligent. That means to be open. It means to be listening. Am I prepared to give the benefit of the doubt to the other side? I think so. That's what we're called to do, I believe. And we're called to take very seriously and to listen and to be patient. And that is the arena in which we can win. And if we can't win in that arena, let's no win. Thank you.
Thank you.
Amen.